clarity comes in when regulation becomes more clearer.
Hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of the Analytics India Magazine podcast Simulated Reality. Today we have with us the founder and CEO of Arya.ai. They predominantly work in the BFSI sector around AI and ML observability and other related solutions. Today we will be talking about a topic which is a bit more complex. While it sounds easy, there's a lot of layers to it, which is AI governance. To start off with, I think while the topic has been discussed and it has become another buzzword, can we kind of deconstruct what AI governance is? Because I think when the word governance comes in, there's a lot to do with the people feel that it is associated with the government, which is basically comes under the umbrella of AI regulation. While I think they intersect at some point as well, can we deconstruct it? What is AI governance? What is AI regulation? Where do they intersect? And what are the different layers in AI governance?
So I think there is a lot of confusion between regulation versus governance, like who owns what or who is responsible to do what, right? Regulations are pretty much, I would call them as rule set. Regulations talks about you should do this, you should not do this and everything, right? Governance is more of a decentralized allocation of duties, for example. It could be at an org level or a societal level or at a larger society, which is primarily the country level, right? When you talk about AI regulations and AI governance, AI regulations is something that regulated bodies would have given some kind of guidelines. So for example, RBI has recently given guidelines on underwriting transparency. Like if you're using any AI ML model, it should be ethical, it should not have bias, it should be explainable and auditable. So this is a very simple text of rules given by the regulations. This is regulations, right? Now the organizations need to do certain things, which is where the governance part comes into play at an organization level. So for an organization to achieve those, to be reliable or to be acceptable to those regulations, they have to do a bunch of things, right? They have to decentralize certain roles and responsibilities across departments. And there should be a centralized body to decide that whether this is happening right or not right and everything. So this framework is pretty much the governance. AI governance is much complex and also much complicated because it's not fully aware about what are these components, who owns what, or how do we allocate these tasks and everything. So I think there is a need for clarity there. Even regulations as well. So for example, in India, the regulations are a little loose at the moment, right? Or at least not clear in some cases. Whereas in Europe, you have clear regulations on how to use AI for low risk, medium risk, high risk cases, for example. Similarly, in Singapore, MAS has given a framework of suggestions. And then US also, there is a bit of clarity. So I think while regulations is getting more clearer, governance is where everybody's will have to focus on to achieve or to be under those regulations.
Yeah, but what is the chain of thought and how does it work out, right?
Yeah.
So I think any laws or regulations that were formed, they were because some kind of an incident or some kind of an activity started by us humans, right? So for instance, we started plastic production, and then we realized it's harmful, and then the laws came in. Now we have started building AI. Now maybe the regulations come in. So how does it work in, and how does it seep into organizations? In the sense that so we create the laws first, or do we create the policies at the at the AI level first, where we kind of have a good understanding? Or the laws seep into the policies? How does that?
Sometimes it works both ways.
Okay.
Right. I think the responsibility should start from the user who is using the technology or the builder, either ways, right? One of those two areas is where it should start, at least in a micro level, if not at a macro level. I think macro level clarity comes in when regulation becomes more clearer. So for example, we talk about AI governance, right? So does it mean that regulations should be there to start using AI governance? No, not at all. AI governance can have org level definitions, right? Or org level targets. Org level targets are, you cannot use any risky models in production, or you cannot use something which can de-harm or create a lot of financial loss or reputation loss. These are the guidelines that is required by any organization, right? These are business guidelines or business objectives, for example. So this AI governance can start achieving those to begin with, if not at the regulations which are at an overall body level, right? So today, while they are aware about what they want to do, but I think there is a lack of correlation between what they're doing at the ML level versus the business objectives or agendas, for example. So for example, today there is a lot of focus on model manufacturing. I think I kind of like the word called modern manufacturing because that's what is happening today, right? People are manufacturing models, a lot of them, without any QC check, for example. So for example, let's say imagine a manufacturing unit where you're manufacturing a bunch of products and you're not at all doing any qualitative check, right? Obviously something is wrong, but you have never identified, right? That's what is happening today. Many people are focusing on publishing models in production rather looking at what is the quality of those models, right? Quality of the models from a performance level, from a risk management level, from a bias or fairness level, for example. So many people are not doing that. So that could be a basic fundamental objective of the AI governance framework, if not the regulations telling you that to do this, right? So this is where it lacks currently.
So I think what I'm getting from you is that it's not just like it's coming from one direction, that one party realizes, the government or the enterprises realizes that it's a collaborative effort and has to be going forward as well. In saying so, what are some of the resources that are needed, right, for this thing? So I see a complete lack of resources that have knowledge on social sciences when it comes to building AI models in very high risk areas, right? And that's not. So I was speaking with another council member on creating digital humans, and they're creating digital humans for enterprises in the US, but they are not hiring social scientists. And I think that's very risky, because if you do not understand the kind of the implications of creating another human over other humans, our human decision making itself is so flawed, right? We make decisions based on our biases that we grew up. Models are going to be biased based on the people who build it. Then who are the people that need to be hired, or what is the kind of expertise around which the teams need to be built by the governments as well as the enterprises? How does it work out?
I think I believe that model building is more like an art, and science of course is involved in building that art, but the artist should always be aware about the societal and a lot of other things as well, right? So one of the things that happens mostly in US is computer science and philosophy is kind of combined as a degree, which doesn't happen in India. People believe that maths is maths. No, it's not. Maths is not maths if it is being used by a human, right? You should have a little bit of touch on societal guidelines, or society, for example, or what you are doing from a design perspective, how it is being done, ethicalness, all of those things.
So
right?
Does the computer scientist, are you saying that the computer scientist is trained for this, or we need a different expertise in it?
Yeah, I think the thought process should be there with the computer scientist at some point of time, or at some level. If not,
that training is needed.
That training is, or at least that understanding is needed. I mean, the training is maybe more methodological, whereas the understanding is something happens when you do a lot of introspection, right? For example, I don't do something wrong because I know that that's wrong, right? That introspection is required for many of these data scientists who are building the models. For example, I build a model, if it is not explainable, and if I force the user to use it, even if it is not being explainable, it's a half-baked and it's a very undercooked kind of execution, right? And depends on the use case, of course. Like if some use case is very sensitive, the user themselves will deny to use the model. If the use case is not sensitive, maybe the people will start using it even though it's a black box models, right? But it's a data scientist who can ask a simple question key, okay, should I give him just the model prediction, or can I give him more information than that, such that they can understand much better than simply giving a simple point output, right? Some of it is actually a lot of introspection that many of these data scientists would require. It's not simple maths. I think we build a lot of models internally. We had a lot of conversations saying that, so we should have policies around AI. Then people will say, no, model should learn it automatically. Fine, your model will learn when you have enough data, but if you do not have data, then until that point, you are risking the usage of those models, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's from the people side of things, right?
Yeah.
So, a basic understanding of social science or other aspects of the decision making in which the model is being, deployed. The other part is what is data governance, right? So, or AI governance for that matter. We talk a lot about responsible AI, right? So how does responsible AI tie into this AI governance? What are the other aspects of it? Because from my understanding, responsible AI, which again consists of within that fairness, accountability, transparency, explainability, privacy, security, which are the different building blocks that probably makes responsible AI. What are the other frameworks or this thing? If organizations have to start approaching the AI governance, what are some of the building blocks that make it, and how can they do it right?
So I think when we are designing AI governance, right? So we have segmented that with 5 or 4 components.
So you have a framework.
Yes. So one is explainability. Explainability means having more transparency in the model predictions or model building process, or even model outcome. One is explainability. Second is monitoring, meaning we should know what's happening in production, and we should be informed or maybe ways to predict when the model can fail, right? Models can fail because there could be a data drift or model drifts. And third piece is the auditability. So how well the models are auditable, right? And fourth is the risk controls or policy controls. How do I manage the risk of AI? So these are the 4 blocks, execution blocks. Now I can use these 4 execution blocks and create an AI governance framework. So I can have guidelines at the governance level saying that all decisions should be transparent. Then explainability will come into play, right? I cannot have an unbounded risk in production, meaning whenever I put a model in production, it will be erratic. Sometimes the model fails because there is a data drift or model drift, right? How do I ensure that there is a bounded risk of using this model in production? Like, for example, the classic example is trading, right? Algorithmic trading. Something happens and there will be billions of losses. There is no cap to the losses, right? Similarly, use AI in any environment, maybe in underwriting or claims or diagnosis or autonomous cars, for example. Is there a way to define a bounded risk? That could be second governance guideline. Third is auditability, right? Whenever something goes wrong, or at least preemptively, I should be able to understand that everybody followed the process that is designed, and it's being monitored at a framework level, that all these artifacts has been captured, the roles and responsibilities of these artifacts have been properly documented and maintained, and all of that. And fourth is the policy controls, comes back to the bounded risk. So what are the different business guidelines that I should make my AI adhere to, right? For example, simpler ones is, you have Asimov principles that you cannot harm human, or you cannot create any injury to human, for example. You have those 3 laws of that, right? Those are your laws of AI. For your business, you may have certain laws because of the process, or because of or the regulated body that you are. So these are the 4 components that we think will give a very strong framework for any organization to execute and very comprehensive AI governance.
Yeah, so explainability, observability, auditability, and
policy control.
Policy control.
Yes.
Okay. And you said there were 5.
4.
4. Okay.
Yeah.
Acha. So your framework revolves around these 4. Acha. Well, there's people, and then there's a framework as well, right? One of the fundamental issues of AI governance is who defines the ethics, and that is something that has always been there. So, for instance, I recently read that Facebook ad revenues dipped by 50% because they said that should they allow them to track some cookies or something like that, right? Now, Facebook revenue suddenly dropping, which means the company's employment will get affected. We are seeing layoffs and this thing. But on the other hand, it is also important to ensure data privacy and other regulations aspect of it. Where do we find the balance, and who finds this balance? Who decides it? Is there a democratic approach? Is there a pure academic approach? What is needed in this?
Yeah, I think when it comes to a larger impact of a certain policy, right? Obviously, the government or the regulated bodies will get involved in defining this, in defining the scope of this, right? That's what happened historically as well. Like the data governance laws will get first discussed at the governing body, which is a parliament or house, for example. They get first validated there, while it get cross-validated by the legal bodies, and then it becomes a law, right? In this case, that's the same thing. I don't think there is any other way to do this. While the corporates can lobby and try to modify this in their preference, but the larger picture always has to be these governing bodies, right, or regulating bodies. They have to define and tell, okay, this is up to this, maybe we can allow, up to this we cannot allow, and it is a lot of responsibility by the governing bodies. They can make these legalities very strict or very.
But they need the right experts, right, to hire.
Yeah,
them.
correct. Yes.
They should have consultant.
Yeah.
So you build this model. You have a social scientist in your company?
No. So we have a lot of, as I said, introspection that we do when we build this. And second, we had faced a lot of challenges earlier when we productionize some of these things. Our customers then become our case studies, right? Like I'll give an example. So a couple of years back, around 2018, 2019, 3 years back, in fact, we built an underwriting model in life insurance business. So this model helps to predict whether I can issue a policy or should not issue a policy. We use deep learning there. So we spent a lot of time in building the model, and we build the model. Now, when we give this model to our customers, the underwriters were not comfortable because we were not giving them too much of explainability, right? Then they said we cannot use this model because being the owner of the business, I need to understand how the model has worked. What are the clear reasons why it is saying I should reject this policy, or why it is saying to investigate, right? So then we didn't, that contract itself didn't converge, even though we had a very heavy, high performance levels. So that became a lesson for us, and we sat with them, understood what is required, how it is required. So some of these discussions happen because of that.
No, I understand this, but this is a to and fro between the customer and this thing.
Yep.
What I'm trying to say is, shouldn't there be an AI ethicist? So especially when it comes to approvals of loans,
Yep.
or any other, house loans or whatever. Yep. There has been a lot of bias that has been introduced into algorithms through, societal biases. Correct. Essentially, where predominantly what is considered a lower strata, or historically, socially, it has been, it may be social or economic, but then the entire understanding of it as to why it can happen and how it can be avoided through different these things, you need to hire a ethicist or a social scientist, right? So that is a must, right?
Yeah, I mean,
the to and fro between two private enterprises is not enough, is what I'm saying.
It's not enough, definitely, and that's where your research studies will come into play, right? So everybody cannot hire the social researcher, for example. Let's call it like that, because that skill set itself is lacking in the ecosystem any which ways, right? They may say that from a philosophy standpoint, a society requires these 5 pillars. Fine. So how is that 5 pillars related to my model? Right? Nobody would have an idea about that. What you have an idea about that is people have done studies, like, for example, explainability, right? What kind of explainability is enough? How the explainability can be spoofed or tampered, even though you have regulations, for example. So these are the studies that people will publish as research papers or articles and all of that. So as long as you're doing enough research on your end, you don't need an expert in from that point of view. This is what I call it as an introspection, right? When you ask a question, you would find a ton of papers around that. Okay, what happened in this study, for example? What happened in this study? On the explainability side, now recently there is a lot of studies that has happened, right? I think one of the examples was on bias, for example. So there is a regulation saying that you cannot use gender or race parameters in underwriting model. This is a regulation now. Now, to identify this, people meaning the regulated bodies, might use certain techniques to say whether your model is using some of these or not, right? But there are ways you can fool these systems. You can still use those features and build a model, and your model could be biased. But let's say you being a regulated body, you are using methods like sharp or lime to say whether my model is biased on these or not. I can actually build a model that can fool sharp and lime. So you can use certain technique to identify whether I'm using a bias or not, right? So this came up from a study.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Research is required, but I'm particularly of the opinion that there should be some kind of a third party, validation to these models, because when two enterprises whose primary goal is to create capitalism, then basically I think it can kind of I think there's a need for a third party auditor or a third party validation when it comes to especially ethics, it being such a complex topic. In saying so, irrespective, right? When we build AI governance, what are some of the best benefits? I have heard an AI ethicist say that good ethics means good business. That's it, pure. Like if you have good ethical product, you will make good money. What do you think are some of your views on what will good AI governance bring to organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I may disagree with that statement that good ethics is equal to good business, because it was proven that good businesses are most of the times are not fully ethical at different scenarios, right? But having said that, what AI governance gives is, as I said, so you may have certain guidelines at the business level and guidelines at the org level, and guidelines at the societal level, and the body, which is the geographical body. You have guidelines at different levels, right? AI governance ensures that you are adhering to all these guidelines. You may not need to wait for the governing geography to give you those guidelines. Fundamentally, it's very basic that you cannot use a risky model, for example. These are very basic guidelines. You know that these are basic, but you are not executing that today, right? So this AI governance framework can help you to adhere to these things. Again, the other question that comes is, okay, who maintains this governance framework, or who is responsible for this governance framework, right? Governance framework is not just the framework, but also defining the roles and responsibilities of those departments, right? You talked about the third party body, right? Most of the times in regulated industries, they would have a third party body within the organization, which is the audit and compliance teams. They would always try to get the balance between the org objectives versus the regulated objectives. They are the guys who are ensuring that it's being maintained to some extent. Ethical ones, non-ethical ones would always find ways to skip those or find the gaps and do that, but that is there any which ways, right? You would always have a body as part of that, as part of the governance framework. You would have a body which is building the models, for example, using the models, auditing and maintaining them, and then centralized body who says which are these policies we should ensure there is a we should follow, how to follow, and what to follow, and all of that. So you have to involve all stakeholders in this governance framework. That is one of the things that is lacking today, right? The AI/ML productionization, in the process of AI/ML productionization, the user has little to no intervention or say in it. They simply have to rely that, okay, because I have a data science teams, they are publishing models, I have to use them. The user team may not be fully satisfied, not fully convinced, but they are forced to use in some cases, which may be okay or not okay. But where I'm coming to is, you need participation of all stakeholders. You cannot do that by using ML tools, right? You need more simplified tools. And the other problem is also translation, right? Translation between data science and the other teams, builders and users. Builders are highly technical, users are highly business oriented. How does the translation happen? Then you have the mid-level layers, which is product teams or data science owners who has the knowledge of the business, and also data science teams who can make the translation. Yeah. I would say the governance framework is not as simple as saying these are the 4 components.
No, I think we have touched upon fair bit of what are the different components that might lead to, and I think this field will keep on changing. It has to be adopted. Even your models, your product that we will go, or any other company that kind of puts their product out. Which brings me to the last question, right? Which you've worked considerably on ML observability. And which is essentially, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, continuous monitoring of a machine learning model, and then improving the parameterization or other elements of the model to improve decision making and accuracy. What does the future of AI governance hold, and what does the ML observability play a role in that? Yeah,
I think observability definition is, if there is a problem, I should know the problem, and I should know the reason of the problem.
Correct.
Such that I can find the answers for it. Right? It's not simply monitoring. monitoring is separate. So you have a monitoring.
Okay.
So observability is very commonly known in software observability, for example, today, right? You have New Relic and all these major guys who have been doing that business for quite some time. ML observability tool should help you to understand the problem. It could be anything: lack of explainability, failure of the model, data drifts, data quality issue. The issues are plenty. It should help you to identify those issues and help you find answers for that in a very easy manner. And if this ML observability tool is usable by any user by the stakeholder across the life cycle of that product, then that's a very good ML observability tool. If now the gap is, how can I use this tool to achieve the governance? The gap is pretty small from that standpoint, right? Because now it has all these components that helps me to identify and do this, and it's also understandable by business. Then how can I use an ML observability tool to build an AI governance framework? Okay, I think a good ML observability tool can help you achieve better scalable AI governance. It's not, as I said, so observability can be defined on different definitions, but this is what we believe is required for an ML observability standpoint.
Okay. With that note, I would like to end this podcast. Thank you so much, Vinay,
Thank you
for coming to our office and shooting the podcast with us.
Awesome. Pleasure being here.
Okay.
Thank you, Kashyap. Thanks.